We already had a huge jargon problem in this translation and localization space. Cat tool, translation editor, translation memory, glossaries, parsing, segmentation, to name just a few, machine translation, TMS, BMS. And what's so interesting is that with all of this jargon, most people don't really refer to the same things when they're talking about something. Maybe for translation memories, yes. I hear parsing and segmentation get interchanged and confused all the time. I hear people talking about TMS being a management system for information. I hear people talking about a translation management system being the actual place where translations take place, where files get uploaded, and it's closer to a content management system for translations. So jargon creates a few different issues. Number one, it creates this alphabet soup, and people refer to different things or same things differently, or different things as the same thing. So you have this conflation issue where different things get put in the same bucket, and you also have this separation issue where same things get separated. So jargon is a complicated thing because it separates people from knowledge, separates people from instinctual capability of understanding what they're talking about. Most people have an understanding of these tools, but they haven't actually built them. So for instance, I can talk about parsing all day, but if I haven't built myself a file parser or really looked at it or used it, etc., maybe the difference between file parsing and segmentation won't be super clear. So there's this challenge around having the idea of what a term means and actually having lived it, breathed it, right? And on top of all this alphabet soup of madness and terminology that we've created in our space, now we've brought in and incorporated all this other alphabet soup from another emerging space, one that's much larger than ours and is taking over the world around AI. So what a large language model is, what a vector database is, what an embedding is, what a chatbot is, what an agent is. So now you bring all of that lexicon into what was already a complicated environment, and what you get is a lot of chaos, because if people were already uncomfortable with what we had previously, now people feel really lost. And I think one of the challenges is that there's a lot of focus on just trying to absorb information, because there's this change creates so much anxiety, right? And at least in me, for instance. So if I feel anxious, I want to go after information. So I'm going to read more about it. I'm going to go to more conferences. I'm going to go talk to more people about it. And at least in my case, counterintuitively, that's very counterproductive, because my brain is a very limited machine. So the more information I put into it, the less I can actually make sense of things. So the more worried I am about all this different terminology and what everything means and how I am connected to these different things, deeper I'm going to sink into paralysis. The less absorbed I am into all this jargon, the more focused I am on just what is right in front of me and what I can do, the more actionable I will become about things. And I think that really pinpoints where I see the biggest issue in our space in 2025, and I do predict this to continue to be the issue in our space for at least a few next years to come. You have this huge gap in between tech potential and tech adoption, right? So the tech potential, yay, it's beautiful. You have large language models and AIs can produce amazing things and blah, blah, and everybody sees these things and these demos and these situations. And then you have the reality of things. The reality is the real raw tech adoption. And when I look at most implementations and how most translation agencies are built, or how most translation programs and enterprise organizations are built, you have this huge gap between what things look like in the surface and what things actually are. So first of all, because of all these labels, a lot of people focus more about chasing the label than the actual thing. So, we need to make sure that we're running our translations through some form of large language models so that we can claim to be AI first. Sure, maybe they're doing that, but they're still sending out emails to translators trying to place tasks. We need to make sure that we're processing everything through machine translation or whatever. Maybe they're doing that, but they don't have any kind of quality management program to make sure that they're routing the right kind of content through the right kind of level of intervention for the kinds of outcomes that people need. And then to make things perhaps even worse, then you have people like me who will keep talking about vision and about ideas and where things are going. So now you have three different layers. You have raw current tech adoption, which is the present. Then you have this immediate tech potential, which could be fulfilled with existing tech. And then you have this other conversation about where things are going to in some distant future. And that's layered, multi-layered AI agents and blah, blah, blah. And, how the end of SaaS, and you have all kinds of like these really abstract conversations about where things are heading. And yes, maybe things will head in that direction really quickly. But nonetheless, we are kind of like getting a single reality, and we're dividing it into multiple realities that are really hard for people to understand. And to aggravate things, there's the marketing component as well, which is, people want to be able to talk about these things in an appealing kind of way. So nobody I know is going to lead a conversation talking about how manual and inconvenient their processes are, or how AI is really just a label that they've slapped onto something that was already not really working that well. And I think nothing is more important when you have real tech potential like we do now. Nothing is more important than going back to the basics. Because if you don't have a very strong core foundation around automation, and you start layering on more AI and more large language models interventions, it's like building a house of cards, because you're putting all kinds of weight onto a structure that can't really hold that weight and isn't built to hold that weight. And then when it comes time to do this more radical rewiring, that's the stuff that people want to leave to the very end, because that's the type of stuff that's painful and very unrewarding, right? So just as an example, if I own an agency and all of a sudden I process some of my content through a large language model, or pre-process or post-process, or add a large language model, I can feel pretty good about myself. I did not disrupt my overall process. I did not perhaps disrupt how my clients work or how my translators work. I did not disrupt much of the process, and I have a really clear win. Yes, the content is being pre-processed by X large language model or post-processed by X large language model. Great. But that win is really just smoke and mirrors for the most part. Now, even though it may have some benefit, the real win is, how do I rewire this? How do I look at whatever is being done? And how do I really optimize step by step the tech potential? So if we take a look at, for instance, the entire translation process, we can break it up into a few different pieces. First piece is inception, right? So you have the inception would be the quoting process, the project building process. How automated is it? And you can automate it in different ways. You can automate it either through integrations, you can automate it through connectors, you can automate it through just process automation, so that when you upload files, you have an automatic quote. That part, if it's not automated, it's got to be automated. And it's got to be not just automated in a very simplistic way, in the sense that, maybe you upload files and you fill out a bunch of fields and you press a few buttons and now you have a quote. Because again, that's the thing about jargon, right? What I call automation, other people can also call something different. And some people claim that, clicking a bunch of buttons is automation. And for me, that's not automation. So that's the first step, is the inception part. Once inception is complete, the second component would be the dispatch part. So the dispatch part is routing the right content to the right people. And maybe I'm missing a part here. After inception, I would probably add the pre-processing part. So the pre-processing part, and I'm kind of lumping that into inception. That would be all of the business rules that you want to implement for that given content. So do you want to pre-translate that? How do you want to pre-translate? What kind of knowledge base are you going to tap into? What kind of machine translation are you going to tap into? What kind of RAG framework are you going to tap into? What's the process going to look like so that you're touching this content before anything specific happens to it, right? Then the dispatch part is, how do you pair the content, either by exception or by rule, to the right people so that you get the desired outcome. So the dispatch part also is something super important. The next step after dispatch would be checks, balances, verifications, and delivery, right? So those would be basically the steps involved in managing a localization or translation project from beginning to end. And if you want to be ready for all of this large language model and AI capabilities, those steps in their rawest form, they need to be really pressed into full tech potential. So And full tech potential doesn't mean 100%. That's something also important. I think a lot of people get wrapped up on this idea of having an all or nothing. Either I can automate all my quotes or nothing. But if you can automate 80% of your quotes, that's huge. Now you're managing by exception. 20% of the quotes are manual. That's great. If you can automate 80% of your task placements, that's huge. Now you're only managing 20% of your task placements by exception. And with each of these changes, you're going to create ripple effects in the organization. So for instance, if you have people on the team that are just, part of their time is updating trackers and they're no longer updating trackers, they're going to have to find out something else to do. If you have people on your team that part of their time is quoting and now there's no longer 80% of the quoting, they're going to have to figure out something else to do. But in my opinion, that's actually kind of a beautiful transformation process, because this is perhaps the most important thing that I'm thinking about, is that there is so much repressed demand for things to be done. And I can't emphasize this enough. So for instance, if you're in a translation agency, typically there's so much more strategic vendor management that could be done. Most translation agencies are working with the same translators over and over and over again for many, many years. And in some ways that's great. But what our times also call for is more specialists. So you need to put in more time to find out the exact translator that's going to be best for this particular project that's maybe a chemical patent in Germany. And you need to find that person or those people, and finding those people isn't necessarily particularly easy, and testing those people and bringing them in and signing contracts with them, etc. So the attention shifts, let's say, from things that are relatively simple and familiar to things that are perhaps more complex and more unfamiliar. Not something that most people like. Again, at least I like simple, predictable, safe, comfortable. That's what I like. You tell me to do things that are unpredictable, feel unsafe, are unfamiliar, I'm going to shy away from those things. So, but the kind of beauty that I do see is that we're not talking about at all, at least in our space in terms of localization, we're not talking about necessarily replacing people. We're talking about displacing what they do. And that is very, very uncomfortable, especially because a lot of people have been out of touch with the idea of learning for many, many years. So they've learned a trade, they've learned a skill, maybe they became a great translator or maybe a great project manager, but they stopped learning. And I'm not saying that's true of everybody, but I do think that is true of some people. And if you stop learning and if you stop being open and exposed to change, this current moment becomes really hard, right? Think about if you stop stretching for maybe 20 years and you're going to become fairly inflexible. And all of a sudden, if you decide to stretch, it won't really come naturally. But again, in the stretching analogy, and I say this because it happened with myself, I didn't stretch for like 20 years, and I am a very inflexible person by nature. When I began stretching again, it was really painful, but it was surprising that within a few months, I was incredibly more flexible than I had ever been. And the beauty of that is that I think that is analogous to our nature. I think our nature is way more adaptable and way more flexible than we give ourselves credit for. So when we look at this kind of transformation, if we really focus on what possible outcomes could really be useful for us, whether we are a translation agency owner, project manager, translator, a translation localization executive at a large enterprise or medium enterprise, someone who's just running growth marketing for a company and happens to own the translation and localization bit as well. It doesn't matter. The point is, there is so much repressed demand for better outcomes, for better things. So there's always more room for us to have more relationship, more engagement with the people who we are either requesting work from us or the people that are delivering work to us. There's more room for us to perform deeper analysis over the kind of work that we're doing and how things could be better. But in order to tackle that repressed demand, we need to shift how we work. And the first step is actually to retire what we used to do so that we can get open for the new. And that's really kind of like, in my opinion, perhaps the hardest part of our transformation process is we need to get rid of the old first to get open to the new. Similar to like a remodeling process, or if you're, just changing things around in your home. First step is you have to get rid of the clutter. If you don't get rid of the clutter, you can't really reorganize things. You can't really bring new things. You're going to create a mess, right? And maybe it's easy to get rid of clutter because you look at things and, this is old, I don't need this, blah, blah, blah. It's really hard in this case because it's not really clutter that we're getting rid of. We're getting rid of the things that give us identity, the things that give us purpose, the things that give us sense of value. But in my opinion, that's really the only way to move forward. So the two key concepts that I keep repeating to myself, again, beyond all of this jargon soup and this complexity that has taken over the world in which I live in, at least, is very simple: creativity and resilience. And creativity, in my opinion, is more important now than ever. Why? Because if you're creative, that means that your mind is open, your mind is perceptive, you're looking laterally, you're looking upwards, downwards. In my opinion, you have to be present to be creative, and to be creative, you have to be hopeful. To be creative, you're embodying some sense of possibility, right? You're entertaining possibility. And the moment really begs for that. The other aspect, the flip aspect, is resilience. And I think you need resilience because things are hard. Things are hard, and I think that things are going to continue to be hard for quite a long time. And all this change is hard, and resilience is what keeps you going at it without necessarily a sense of an immediate gratification. And that's why I think resilience is so important, because at least, me, if you ask me, I would rather have instant, immediate gratification than, work for something that's going to take a long time. But resilience, in my opinion, in this particular moment, is not just pays off, but is inexorably connected to the idea of creativity. Because if you are resilient, that means you're going to be more open to creativity because you're sticking with it. You're looking at the same problem day after day and slowly opening yourself up to the idea of creativity. Again, I don't think creativity is something that just dawns on people. At least it doesn't just dawn on me. But I think that if I am consistent about how I approach things, if I am minimally lucid and level-headed, and if I am, trying to look beyond all of this quagmire of terms and jargon, then I can kind of just think about what can I do today. And that is, in my opinion, really the paramount of creativity, is looking at the things that we can do today and being a little bit creative about every little thing. And if you're a little bit creative about every little thing, you're going to paint an overall creative picture. You don't have to be a creative genius. You don't have to reinvent everything, all at once. I don't think you need a eureka aha moment to be creative. And I think the other thing is, if you are creative and resilient, you will figure out ways, because you understand that maybe you don't know something now, but you begin to build up more frustration tolerance. And the more frustration tolerance you build up, the more likely you are to find solutions. So that's my reflection for the day, but would love to know what you think. Please leave your thoughts, comments below. Again, thanks so much for all the viewership. We really appreciate you in our channel. Until next time, bye-bye.